Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Erika Barnett, and I'm with the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute. We are thrilled to be able to host this informational session on the online graduate certificate in Greenhouse Gas Management at George Washington University. My role today is to be your guide through today's session. I will introduce our first speaker and facilitate the question and answer section at the end of the webinar. Before we dive in, a few logistical notes. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be made available in an email to participants and posted to the program website. This webinar will last 30 minutes with time at the end for questions. At any time, you may ask a question of the presenters by typing a question into the chat box. If you experience technical difficulties, please contact the organizer via the chat box. Okay, without further ado, here's Rachael Jonassen.
Great, thanks, Erika. Hi, I'm Professor Rachael Jonassen, the Director of Greenhouse Gas Management at the George Washington University, and I'm so glad to be able to meet you today. This is one of my favorite events, and I hope it gives you a good picture of what you'll experience when you enroll in the Greenhouse Gas Management Certificate. Today, I'll give you information about the administration of the certificate program in Greenhouse Gas Management and how your online learning will work. And then two others related to our program, we give you more details. Tom Baumann is co-founder at the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute and someone I've worked with closely over the past 5 years as we developed this collaborative offering in greenhouse gas management, the first of its kind in a university graduate engineering program. Tom co-authored several courses incorporated into the certificate program, including the project level accounting, verification, and information management systems. Tom will tell you more about the courses you will take in the program and how they prepare you for the rapidly growing field of greenhouse gas management. Professor Frédéric Gagnon-Lebrun is European Relations Lead and Climate Expert at Econolair in Brussels, Belgium, and is our other speaker today. Professor Gagnon-Lebrun is one of 6 faculty within the program who support your learning, and he offers a deep background in greenhouse gas management and associated policy issues in climate change. Frédéric will give you more detail about the course he teaches in this program. It's called Greenhouse Gas Measurement and Reporting, and it's the second of our 4 courses, and is one of the courses available to you this fall as you begin your training. Next slide, Erika, please. Let me begin by telling you about our institution. The George Washington University hosts about 25,000 students in 10 colleges and schools, including the School of Engineering and Applied Science, where your program is located. Within our school, there are 5 departments, and yours, Engineering Management and Systems Engineering, is one of the largest and oldest in the United States. Nearly all our students are graduate students, and over half are off-campus students like you will be in this program. So we are deeply steeped in graduate and professional education. The certificate, this is something we worked on closely with the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute for several years. It has been fully approved by the GW Faculty Senate and the GW Board of Trustees. The 4 graduate level courses are 3 credit hours each. All courses can be applied to graduate programs at GW, including online programs that lead to a master's degree. And these courses are produced in conjunction with university experts in cinematography, animation, and the arts and science of learning. Each course is an online librarian working directly with you and the instructor to ensure that you have access to all the online knowledge resources of the university. The faculty have been selected and appointed specially to this program in cooperation with GHG for the exact expertise and teaching ability required. Besides myself, those teaching this year include Professors Marco Buttazzone, Professor Gagnon-Lebrun, and Mark Trexler. You can learn more about the faculty at our website. 2 courses will be available this fall, the one that Frédéric teaches, which he will tell you about shortly, and one taught by myself on the climate change science underlying greenhouse gas mitigation efforts. We are now accepting applications for the fall cohort, and classes will begin in late August. The expected minimum level of effort for each course is 7.5 hours per week. This minimum expectation is set by university regulation. The fees for this online offering are reduced from those for campus courses by about 1/2 and are $995 per credit hour, including a rebate from our institute. For admission into the program, these requirements hold. You must have a suitable bachelor's degree, such as engineering, mathematics, or science, or a bachelor's degree with appropriate work experience, which you must document. You must have a B or better average in your junior and senior years and must submit a transcript. You also must submit a statement of purpose indicating your career objectives and how you see the certificate fitting into those plans. Applications for this fall must be submitted by the end of July. Next slide, please, Erika. Now for the fun stuff. You'll use Blackboard as the learning management system for each course. You'll participate in live synchronous sessions weekly using full two-way audio and video. That will allow private conferences with your professor or with fellow students also. Blackboard is a really rich learning environment with many resources for each course. You're seeing a round-the-clock look at a few of them here. The exact resources will vary from one course to another. Let's look at a few going clockwise from the top left. You'll use and construct wikis to share knowledge with your students. Short videos help to explain the tougher concepts like radiative forcing. The top center shows a few students discussing the problem of bunker fuels. You'll get access to many interviews with experts in each area. In the upper right, I'm interviewing a world expert on solar energy. On the right, you see that Blackboard hosts discussion boards where you share your ideas and thoughts on a particular topic with other students. The spider diagram in the lower right shows a special tool Professor Trexler uses in his course. Because GHW sits in the midst of the nation's government and international policy makers, you have special access to unique expertise. At the bottom center, you see experts from the Government Accountability Office discussing federal greenhouse gas emissions in an on-site video they helped us produce especially for this program. You'll encounter many similar special videos. On the left side, you see the actual Blackboard system with its blue navigation pane and an example exercise. Finally, in the center, you see one of the ways we help you keep your learning on track as the course progresses. Each learning video contains stopping points shown by the green boxes at the bottom. They may point to additional resources or may quiz you as illustrated here. You'll get instant feedback within the video and follow-up from your instructor during those live sessions. Well, I hope that gives you a flavor for what your learning will be like. Now I'd like to turn it over to Tom Baumann, who will tell you more about the content of the courses and how they prepare you for the global demand for experts in this field. Tom?
Thank you, Dr. Jonassen, and welcome everyone to this webinar. I want to start by saying that all of us here at the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute are proud to have co-developed this carbon management certificate program with George Washington University. The courses that I will introduce shortly are built from our expertise working on climate change policy, carbon markets, and greenhouse gas emissions accounting over the last 20 years. And this experience includes active engagement in authoring the international guidelines for greenhouse gas inventories under the IPCC, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and also the ISO standards. And it's not widely known, but we're also training the technical compliance inspectors under the UNFCCC. As well, in the near future, something similar will be done for the Paris Agreement. This work has shown us that there's an enormous need for expertise to support the implementation of climate change policies around the world. and that this expertise is in short supply in both government and the private sector. What we aim to instill in you is an understanding that the role of carbon management professionals requires not only technical competency, but also an ethical and career commitment to something that's bigger than oneself. It's not completely hyperbole to say that the fate of the world will rest in large part with tomorrow's carbon managers. This slide here shows you the evolving extent of carbon pricing policies around the world, covering a significant range of global emissions trading and tax schemes in various countries. Next slide, please. The certificate program we're offering is both uniquely focused and comprehensive. Over 1 or 2 years, you will develop the skills needed to be a practicing carbon management expert. Firstly, you'll get the essential background on climate science and climate policy in both domestic and international contexts. And we can't stress too much how important it is that you have a deep understanding of these enabling policies, given how much it drives the greenhouse gas mitigation and management. We'll, of course, dive deep into the rules and methodologies for greenhouse gas accounting. And this will focus on the energy sector because it's such a dominant source of emissions. And when it comes to analyzing how to reduce emissions, we'll call project level accounting. We'll also focus on energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies. As well, an especially unique aspect of this curriculum is the course on how we use information technology for greenhouse gas data management, as well as the critical process of how to be a verifier of emissions data and reports. Next slide, please. For those of you that choose the option of completing a final course project, there is the possibility of writing up your work and having it published as an article in the peer-reviewed Carbon Management Journal, which is sponsored by the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute. Next slide, please. Here you'll see listed the 4 specific courses in the certificate program. In addition to receiving your carbon management certificate, your course credit is also fully transferable into a master's degree or a PhD program. Now I'd like to introduce Frédéric Gagnon-Lebrun, who will instruct the course on greenhouse gas measurement and reporting. He will give you an overview of this fundamental course.
Thank you very much, Tom, for the introduction to the overall course package. Next slide, Erika. I'm truly delighted to have joined the team and to be teaching this course this coming semester in the fall. As you can see from my track record, I think I demonstrate the career commitment to climate change and carbon management that Tom referred to. I've been working on climate change for about 18 years, my whole career, and got interested in the topic when I was at university at the time of the ratification and entry into force of the Kyoto Protocol. Much of my work on carbon management and climate change has been with international organizations as well as in consulting, working with both policymakers and businesses, trying to understand what it will mean for them to be operating in a world that will be increasingly constrained in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So a lot of my work is focused on translating the international agreements, like the Paris Agreement, into national policies and reporting mechanisms that are used in these agreements, both in developed countries and in developing countries. I've worked for several years in designing carbon markets or carbon pricing instruments more generally. Along the lines of the map that Tom showed you, we can see these different types of policies being adopted in many countries as countries strive to meet their Paris agreement targets. I've also worked mostly in a North American context, supporting businesses in addressing this new reality of policies and regulations to constrain carbon emissions being enacted at the federal level as well as the provincial or state levels in the US. For many companies, this represents a new cost that they need to take into account in their operations, but it also can represent an opportunity for those companies that can reduce emissions and generate what's called an offset credit that could be then sold on the market. So we'll see in the course how these different mechanisms work and the underpinning calculations that need to be undertaken to actually operate in this new environment. Next slide, Erika. So the two key drivers that I'd like to talk about for the need for carbon managers in companies and in governments that Tom referred to. The first driver is the entry into force of the Paris Agreement. Under the Paris Agreement, all countries have an emission target that they are internationally bound to meet. And along with meeting the target, there are reporting requirements that countries have that are required to follow to report back to the international community. So as part of this implementing the Paris Agreement at the national level, countries will be implementing different types of regulations, different types of economic instruments, like carbon pricing, a carbon tax, a carbon market, to drive emission reductions in businesses so that they are able to meet the Paris Agreement and demonstrate to the world that they have actually met their target. And to do so, companies will be increasingly required to manage their carbon, report on their emissions. And in the course, we'll see what this means for a company to actually have to develop a greenhouse gas inventory and report back following these types of regulations. The second driver, next slide, Erika. The second driver is related to what we call the voluntary disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions and related risks from businesses. The Paris Agreement has set a target of keeping the world from warming more than 2 degrees Celsius at a very maximum by 2100. And companies are now engaging, especially multinationals are now engaging in trying to figure out what that means for them. What does it mean when you're a cement manufacturer with plants all over the world to keep the temperature down under 2 degrees Celsius? What is my role as a cement producer in that world? And companies are now setting what we call science-based targets and have to report back against those types of targets, developing various types of scenarios. So we'll understand, we'll look at what that means. And there's a group as well of experts from the financial sector that has joined what's called the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures that have come together to develop recommendations for large companies and investment funds to support them in starting to disclose to their investors or shareholders what climate means for them, both in terms of the physical impacts of climate change as well as the exposure to new regulations that would constrain their carbon emissions. So that's a second type of driver, second reason why Tom was saying that we will increasingly need carbon managers in the world all over the planet. Next slide, Erika. So the course itself on greenhouse gas management and reporting has 4 key objectives. We'll look at, how do you set objectives for developing a greenhouse gas inventory when you are operating a business? We'll help you and give you the tools to analyze and interpret greenhouse gas data and develop sort of critical thinking about a greenhouse gas emission report that might be in front of you with its supporting documentation. So the overall objective really is to give you an understanding of why companies need to develop a greenhouse gas inventory and quantify their emissions, as well as give you all the tools that underpin these requirements that companies are responding to, or the voluntary disclosure that companies might want to engage in. So this will be a fairly technical course. And for instance, we'll look into how to develop a greenhouse gas inventory. Next slide, Erika. So to give you a flavor of the kind of work that we will be doing, greenhouse gas emissions come from various types of activities, whether it's driving a car, operating a boiler, or through chemical reactions when producing cement. So we'll need to understand the greenhouse gas emissions. We'll need to have a good grasp of these activity data and then use emission factors to then finally end up with the greenhouse gas emissions of an asset or of a facility. And there are lots of subtleties and complexities that we'll get into as well, and conversions that are needed. For instance, to be able to deal with different types of greenhouse gases that have a different impact on the climate. So this is for the global emissions of a facility or a company. But next slide, Erika. We're also going to look at what Tom referred to as the project level greenhouse gas inventory or emission reductions. Often when a company asks for a subsidy, for instance, the government for providing the subsidy is interested in understanding what the impact of that subsidy will be. So the company would have to develop a project and say, I will invest the subsidy in such and such ways, and this will be my emission reduction generated by the investment. And to do that, we need to develop emission projections, essentially a business as usual scenario, and compare that with the GHG emissions from the facility to then get to an emission reduction. So that's a different type of thinking that is used quite often by carbon managers, emission managers, to understand what is the emission reduction generated by a certain type of investment or activity. And this is the same process for generating a carbon credit that has a value on the market. So we'll get into the details of that as well. Next slide, Erika. So to understand the subtleties, we'll need to get into and explore the guidance that exists out there to support the work of carbon managers. And there's one seminal work, really, called the GHG protocol, developed by the World Resources Institute and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, that provides guidance and standards for greenhouse gas accounting and reporting. And we're also going to look at different ISO standards that have been developed to support both regulators and companies in calculating their emissions and reporting them. The ISO standards look at the quantification, but also at the supporting ecosystem of auditors and how to accredit auditors and verifiers and validators, for instance, and what kinds of credentials those need to have to be able to come and audit a greenhouse gas inventory from a company. The ISO standards are used all over the world as sort of the backbone of methodologies for quantifying emission reductions, as well as for greenhouse gas inventory regulations. So it's quite important to understand the backbone of these regulations that we're seeing being developed all over the world. Next slide, Erika. The learning will be done quite interactively through live lectures, through recorded videos. There'll be interactive class discussions through the Blackboard application that Rachel presented. And it will be important for us that you get your hands dirty in a way, and that we have a very hands-on case study application for you to start doing calculations and seeing what it might actually look like to develop such a calculation for a company. We've developed a case study, a fictive company called the APEC Group, for which you'll be asked to prepare an inventory management plan, calculate the greenhouse gas emissions, and do quality checks. And in addition to that, because it's such an fast evolving field, we will ask you to assess the implications of various topical news and events that might actually have implications for the company and the way you calculate the greenhouse gas emissions of that company. So I'm very excited to teach this course this fall. I hope this gave you a good flavor of what you'll be learning, and I certainly hope to see you in the fall. Back to you, Erika.
Thank you, Rachel, Tom, and Frédéric. This has been a great overview of the program. The most important thing I wanted to do is leave time at the end for attendee questions. We had a few come in during the session. To get us started, a couple for Rachel. What is a single course tuition or fee? And are there any scholarships?
Thanks, Erika. Question everybody's always interested in. As I mentioned earlier, these are full graduate level courses, so the fees in general would be the same as any student would pay at George Washington University. However, we have an arrangement with the university that they're allowing us to essentially rebate half of that, so that your fee will be $995 per credit hour. Each course is 3 credit hours in size, so you'd be paying 3 times the $995 for each course, and you can total that up across the 4 courses if you want to know your total price for the certificate program itself. There are minor fees related to applications and things like that, but those are relatively small, and some of those fees can actually be waived. Let me know if you have problems with any of the standard fees, but there are no ways to waive, of course, the basic tuition. That said, the university has various financial aid and support packages available. In order to discuss those with any student, the university policy is that the student must first be admitted to the university. So your process would be to go ahead and complete the application for the program, get accepted into the university as a graduate student, and then you can approach the financial aid office to discuss any potential aid that might be available to you, depending on your own particular needs and circumstances.
Okay, great. And another one for you, Rachel. How long does a single course last? Can you start with any course, or do you need to take courses sequentially?
Okay, a couple of really good questions there. Each course, again, is a full semester course. So these are 14-week semesters, the regular length of semesters at George Washington University. So we have a fall semester, 14 weeks, and then a spring semester, 14 weeks. Your courses would go through the regular progression so that you will be exposed to a new module or topic each week of the semester, and the online Blackboard system is organized that way so that you're exposed to that new material in sequence as we go along. So that would be the length of each course will be the same. In terms of the order of taking courses, we have the regular numbering system, which sort of presents an ideal order. You would take the 6290, which is the science and policy background, then you would take the course from Frédéric on measuring and reporting emissions, and then you take the course on projects where you would learn how to reduce emissions, and finally the course that gives you the follow-up on data management systems and the verification process. So if you wanted to take the certificate over a full 2-year period, that would be the recommended order to take the courses. It's not required, though. We've not built in requirements that mandate that you must take them in that order. So a lot of people opt to take 2 courses per semester and finish the certificate in 1 year, and that's perfectly fine. And that, of course, ideally would be to take my course and Friedrich's course, which happened to be available this fall, the first semester, and then take the other 2 courses in project and reductions and verification and databases in the spring. That also is not required. So if you want to mix and match and take them in another sequence, that's entirely possible. I would recommend that you make sure you've discussed those plans with the individual faculty before you take a course, just to make sure that you're both on the same page and the faculty know that you may not have particular background that you might have gotten in some of the course if you'd done some other order.
Great, thank you, Rachel. This next one is for Tom and Friedrich. The slide on carbon pricing, such as carbon taxes and carbon markets around the world, illustrates global momentum to account for and value carbon. What are some other drivers for greenhouse gas management and reporting?
Thanks, Erika. I guess I'll go first. And Frédéric had noted a couple of the main initiatives under the voluntary disclosure category, in addition to the Paris Agreement. And really, it's the financial sector that has, over the last 3 years, been doing a lot of work to develop new frameworks and guidelines for determining climate risks. And the driver there is the International Financial Stability Board, who previously, after the financial crisis, looking at systemic risks to the financial system, when they completed their work, they recognized as well that climate change is also a systemic risk to the global financial system. And so they established the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure and came up with a series of recommendations for companies and financial entities to disclose climate risks, whether that's transition risks, which relates to the potential costs of complying with climate change policies, as well as climate impact risks. So physical impacts to supply chains or otherwise compromising production for companies. And what does that mean to the value of the companies and assets? So risks to investors and shareholders, and what are the responsibilities for the managers of those assets and companies? And so the driver there is for GHG measurement and reporting. How can these companies better understand their exposure to climate risks? So they'll need to quantify that, need to measure it in order to manage it. And that extends beyond their company footprint or the footprint of their scope 3 through to their products, designing climate-friendly products with a lower carbon footprint, and emerging procurement programs. So the drivers for carbon managers is really becoming very embedded in the financial sector, and this is only going to continue. Frédéric, if you'd like to add any more to that, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I mean, Tom has talked about the voluntary disclosure of carbon exposure, and indeed, a lot of work has been done by the financial sector because this risk has become inevitable and systemic, as Tom was saying, to the financial sector and to indeed specific companies themselves. I think it's important to highlight that that work started in the footsteps of the Paris Agreement and the discussions on how to implement the Paris Agreement. And those two go really hand in hand. With Paris, what we're seeing is all countries have taken a target. There are many of them have started and are considering putting a price on emitting a ton of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And this is where it actually starts having a cost. And the objective is for companies to make decisions now taking into account that emitting greenhouse gases has a cost, and that will gradually influence the way they invest in the types of systems that they develop and the kinds of suppliers that they use as well. As Tom referred to the impact on the supply chain as well of these companies. So those are all very much interlinked, but it's important to understand that we're not only talking about the physical climate risks, but mostly the risk to companies that comes from policies being adopted and the price being put on carbon, essentially. And as Tom mentioned, to understand that exposure, to understand that risk, companies need to understand what are their current emissions, future emissions, and emissions of future investments, expansions into certain countries, looking at what types of policies might be coming into the countries they want to expand into, etc. So it really becomes a central part of the strategic decision making of companies going forward.
Great, thank you. I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. So to close, I want to thank our panelists and thank you all for dedicating your time today to learn more about this program. You will be receiving this webinar recording in a follow-up email. In the event that I missed your question, please do not hesitate to contact Rachael. I know that she would be more than happy to answer any inquiries you might have. Thank you all again, and we look forward to your future enrollment.
Thanks, Erika.
Thank you, Erika.
Thanks and goodbye.